Before the sun ever sets on a man's past, it gives him one last test. That evening it crawled to my doorstep on bleeding knees and dared me to look away. And when she spoke, it wasn't fear in her voice, it was command. "Don't just stare, cowboy." Something bit me between my legs. Suck the venom out before it spreads. Before we ride any further into this story, make sure you like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The sky had turned the color of dried rust by the time Michael Creel finished chopping wood behind the barn. The day had been long, brittle, and sun-scoured like every other that summer, but something about the stillness in the air pressed against his ribs wrong. No wind, no distant cattle lowing, just heat sitting heavy over the land. He stood there a moment, hands on his hips, spine stiff from labor, eyes drifting toward the horizon out of habit. Not searching for anyone, he simply didn't trust surprises. Michael was 40. From a distance, he could pass for younger, broad-shouldered and steady on his feet, but up close, the truth lived in the fine lines around his eyes and the faint drag in his left leg when storms rolled in. Years as a cavalry horse wrangler had carved quiet marks into him, scars. Beneath his shirt, a knee that flared when the weather shifted, and a sharp instinct for reading men without needing their words. Folks in town didn't pry. He wasn't unfriendly, just sealed off. After the floods swallowed his wife and boy 3 years earlier, he'd moved out to this weathered ranch wedged between two mesas, rebuilt it plank by plank, and kept to himself unless someone truly needed a hand. That evening he was walking toward the house with a metal bucket swinging from his grip, when movement flickered near the dry trail that cut past the trough. Something low to the ground, too small for a man standing, too slow for a rider. He stopped mid-step. The bucket handle creaked as his fingers tightened. The sun hung low, throwing glare across the dirt, but he could make out a shape crawling. He moved closer, boots crunching over packed earth. 30 yards out he saw her clearly, barefoot, dress torn across the back and shoulders, one arm dragging like it didn't belong to her anymore. Dust coated her legs. Her knees were scraped raw. Blood darkened the outside of her thigh. She didn't lift her head until he was 5 steps away. Her voice barely made it past her lips. "Don't look between my legs, cowboy." Something bit me. Michael didn't answer. He set the bucket down slow, knelt beside her and studied the wound. Her upper thigh, just below the line of her underclothes, had already begun to swell. 2 deep punctures sat angry. And red against flush skin, snakebite, close to the femoral artery. He didn't bother asking what kind. It wouldn't change what needed doing. He unbuckled the knife from his belt. Her hand jerked weakly toward him. "I said don't." "I'm not here to hurt you," he said evenly. No softness in it. No threat either, just truth. He sliced the fabric away with careful precision. The bite looked fresh, less than an hour. Her leg twitched without rhythm. He leaned in, pressed his mouth to the wound, drew hard once, spat into the dirt. Again, blood, mixed with saliva. Again, he kept his movements controlled. Her fingers clawed into the ground. Then her body slackened and she slipped into darkness. Michael tore a clean strip from the hem of her dress, tied it tight above the bite, then slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees. She weighed less than she ought to. Her head rolled against his chest. Heat radiated off her skin already. Inside the cabin he moved with purpose, cleared the cot, laid her down. The place was one room, stove near the wall, a rough table, bunk in the corner, shelves lined with jars, tools stacked in neat rows. He poured hot water from the kettle into a tin cup, added crushed poppy root from a pouch in the drawer, stirred until it dissolved. He lifted her head carefully, braced her neck, and tipped the cup to her lips. She gagged once but swallowed. As she lay there breathing shallow, he studied her properly. Late 20s maybe. Features mixed, Apache and something else, perhaps Mexican. Sunburned skin, cracked lips, bruises circling her wrists and ankles. Summer told its own story, and so did bruises shaped like fingers. He checked her pulse. Faint but present. He cleaned his blade at the workbench, wiped it dry, then returned to the crate beside her cot. He didn't remove his boots, just leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the rise and fall of her chest. She had been running. That was clear. From who and how far he didn't know. But the snake hadn't claimed her yet. That meant she still had a chance. He intended to give it. The only sound in the cabin was the slow creak of cooling roof boards. Michael didn't try to unravel why fate had dragged her across his trail. She needed help. That was enough. He would keep watch. He wouldn't sleep. Not tonight. The air inside carried faint smoke and iron. Maya opened her eyes slow, lashes sticky with dried sweat. Her throat burned. Her skull throbbed like someone knocking from the inside. She stayed still at first, staring at rough-hewn planks overhead. One board was split straight down its length. It groaned when wind leaned against the walls. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Pain kept her from guessing. Then memory returned in pieces, the brush tearing her skin. The rattle in the grass, boots near her face, steady hands at her leg. Not greedy hands, not cruel, just deliberate. Then blackness. She tried to sit up. Agony ripped through her thigh and forced a sharp breath from her mouth. "Careful!" The voice came from near the stove. He stood there, turning a kettle over a low flame that looked tended all night. Broad back. Sleeves rolled, stubble shadowing his jaw. His movements unhurried. He poured into a mug and set it aside. "You're in my place." "Snake got you!" "Nearly too late." She wet her cracked lips. "You looked." "I did. Had to." He faced her fully then and crossed the room, handing her the mug. Their fingers brushed by accident. Neither reacted. The warmth of the drink settled in her stomach, heavy and real. "How long?" she asked. "Since dusk yesterday. Fever broke before dawn. Worst's behind you." She shifted carefully. The torn fabric of her dress had been pinned at the thigh. With one of his shirt buttons, the wound wrapped in boiled cloth, tied by someone who knew what he was doing. Her jaw set. "Who are you?" "Michael Creel." She nodded once. "Maya." They didn't shake. He didn't ask where she'd come from. She didn't offer it. But she saw his eyes register the bruises along her wrists, the healing cuts at her collarbone. No flinch, no pity. He retrieved a small tin from the shelf and placed it beside her. "For swelling." "Tastes bitter." Her fingers trembled when she took it. She despised that. Despised weakness. He didn't comment. He was already back at the stove, stirring beans and salt pork. She studied the room instead. Everything in order. Nails lined on wood. Rope coiled clean. Tools sharpened. Rifle resting in the corner, not hidden, not displayed. This wasn't a drunk's shack. It was a place built to last. "You live alone?" she asked. He nodded. She watched his face. Something quiet lived behind his eyes. "You're not going to ask where I came from?" "You'll tell me if you want." No man had answered her like that before. They sat in silence that didn't press or demand. When she finished drinking, he rinsed the mug without ceremony. She lay back slowly. Pain dulled but lingered. Outside, a horse snorted. A hinge whispered in the breeze. Michael opened the door halfway and stood there watching the empty trail. Maya turned her face toward the wall and slept, without fear, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The morning rose hot and merciless. Cicadas screamed from mesquite beyond the fence. Heat shimmered off rocks near the barn. When Michael stepped back inside with firewood, the cot was empty. He didn't call her name, just paused, noting the folded blanket, the untouched tin of salve. He stepped outside. She stood near the corral, gripping the fence. Leg stiff, bandage loosened, breath tight between her teeth. She refused to look at him long. Pride was stitched into her spine. He walked past her without a word, fetched a leather strap, returned, and knelt to tighten the wrap with clean cloth. "You'll tear it again if you rush," he said. "I don't like lying down," she replied, steady. "Then don't, just slow yourself." They stood there a moment, two strangers, too worn for games. "You work horses?" she asked. "Used to, cavalry, now just mine." She eyed the tall black stallion in the pen. "What's his name?" "Doesn't have one." "That's a shame." The faintest corner of his mouth lifted. "You hungry?" She followed him inside without answering. He served eggs, bacon, cornbread. She ate measured, not ravenous, like someone who had learned to hide hunger. When she finished, she spoke at last. "Came from north. Camp in the hills." They didn't give names. Took me after a raid. Killed the rest. Her voice didn't shake. Waited till one got drunk. Then I ran. You made it, Michael said quietly. You believe in luck? She asked. No, me neither. The words lingered. She tested the tightened bandage. I'll sweep the porch. You don't have to. I know. He didn't stop her. Outside, the broom scraped steady across wood. Michael sat with coffee listening. It didn't sound like noise. It sounded like someone planning to remain. And for the first time in years, that sound didn't weigh on him. The wind turned colder that night, sweeping down from the ridge with a bite that hinted at changing seasons. Maya stood on the porch beside Michael, both of them watching the last of the light fade beyond the mesas. Neither spoke for a long while. The ranch no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt claimed, quietly, without ceremony. They'll look for me, she said at last. Men like that don't let go easy. Michael kept his eyes on the darkening horizon. Then they'll find more than they expect. There was no bravado in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. 2 days later they came. 3 riders, dust trailing behind them like a warning. Maya saw them first from the corral and didn't run. She walked to the porch and stood beside Michael. The stallion stamped once, sensing tension. The men dismounted with careless confidence, hands near their guns, eyes roaming. She's ours, the tallest one called. Was, Michael corrected calmly. The silence stretched tight as wire. One of the riders laughed, but it broke quick when Michael's rifle came up steady, unshaking. Maya stepped forward, not behind him, but beside him, chin lifted. The men saw something then, resolve where they'd expected fear. The wind shifted. The stallion screamed sharp and wild. It was enough. The riders hesitated, calculating. 3 against 2 who weren't backing down. They mounted again without another word and turned their horses south, dust swallowing them whole. The ranch grew quiet once more. Maya exhaled slowly. Guess I'm staying, she said. Michael lowered the rifle. Wasn't planning on asking you to leave. The sun dipped low, painting the land in amber and gold. Side by side, they stood watching it settle. Not rescued, not saved, just 2 people who chose to remain. And sometimes, out here in the Wild West, that was more than enough.